talking about yet another remake which some people consider to be one of the worst. Although, honestly, even as I sit down to analyze everything about it, it's not that bad. It's not that good, but it's really not that terrible. The title of both of the movies I'm going to be comparing tonight is House on Haunted Hill, and this is yet another case where they didn't really have much to work off of from the original. However, the original did do a couple of things better in regards to some of the characters, at least. For one thing, as was the case with 13 Ghosts, there's a villain in the original House on Haunted Hill who doesn't seem very apparent at first. It is subtly hinted at the beginning of the film when the characters are being introduced, but, for the most part, he just comes off as a somewhat likable straight man before it turns out that he's plotting to kill someone. In the reimagining, you can tell pretty early on that the guy's an asshole, especially in a certain scene where he's interacting with Price's character, and then he almost becomes a necrophiliac. I mean, they could have at least tried to make him seem somewhat likable before the twist happened. Also, there's this crazy guy in both movies who owns the house, and I think his character is done much better in the original. He just comes off as this very insane, haunted man terrified of the old house. In the remake, he's played by Chris Kattan, who I like as long as he's doing something more comedic, but in this he's attempting to do a serious, straight role, and he just comes off as extremely annoying. Like, when you're first introduced to his character, some of the first lines out of his mouth are something along the lines of, "Okay, can you stop the car now? Can you stop the car now? Okay, can you get out now? Can you get out now? Okay, can we just go into the house now? Can we just go into the house now?" This is one of the last guys to die in the movie. Also, the original does Price better. Of course, Vincent Price is an icon, as do most self-respecting horror fans. I love him. Of course, his name in the original film isn't Price, it's Frederick Lawrence. In the remake, they changed his name to Stephen Price. And I do like some things about Jeffrey Rush's performance in the remake. I like how he plays him as more of this straight-up eccentric slimeball of a character. I also like how towards the end of the film he manages to keep his sense of humor. But at the same time, there are some moments where he just kind of contradicts himself as a character. It's apparent early on how much he and his wife absolutely hate each other. They are just, in both movies, they're at each other's throats, and it's played much more intensely in the remade version. But then, he ends up being sad for his wife, and then there's a point where, right after he says that he's going to murder her, he suddenly becomes concerned for her life. The best sense I can make out of that is, I guess he doesn't want anyone or anything else doing the job for him. In the original, Vincent Price, of course, plays it in a much more charismatic manner, and you never quite know what's going through his character's head. You don't know whether he's one of the good guys or not, or whether you can trust him. But at the same time, again, he is very charming, and he is at least more consistent with the Stephen Price of the remake, in that when he believes that his wife has been murdered, he isn't too happy about it, but at the same time, he's not exactly broken up about it either. Now, with that being said, there are a couple of characters who I liked more in the remade version of the film, predominantly the female ones. For one thing, there's the lead woman in the film. She was okay in the original. I do like how they gave her a more sympathetic backstory in that she was taking care of her family and everything, but at the same time, she was kind of an idiot. Like, when she finds out who the caretakers are, She doesn't ask the one guy what he meant when he said that someone was going to kill her, and then when she finds the severed head in her bag, she takes quite a while to tell anyone about it. In the remake, whenever she's freaking out over something, she does it in a much more believable manner. She's a lot smarter about it. She's a lot stronger. And I find her backstory a little more intriguing, even though there isn't much given away about it. I think that she's just more well-rounded in the remake. Honestly, it seems to be a common trend for remakes to have stronger female characters than their original counterparts, which brings me to the next character that the remake of House on Haunted Hill does better, and that is Price's wife. I do like the way that she was done in the original. She was a very manipulative sort of femme fatale character, and it was well done, but she is much more interesting in the remake. She's a lot bitchier towards the other house guests. She's more violent, like in the scene where she and her husband are going back and forth. She actually fights him back, and she's funnier. I like how she adds some dark humor to the movie. And I also like the house a lot better in the remake. I like how it actually takes place in an abandoned mental asylum. It's definitely a much better setting for a horror movie. Although there are some things about it that don't quite make sense, like the stained glass window on the ceiling is just kind of silly. And then there's a point in the saturation chamber, which I'm going to talk about a little further in a minute, but like there's this pair of goggles hanging from the ceiling of the chamber saying something along the lines of, in case of a mental breakdown, put these on. Yeah, I don't let the mental insanity get into your eyes. However, the house did have a really good aesthetic going for it overall. It was really creepy, but also really beautiful to look at the same time. And then one setting in it, which is yet another that I suppose doesn't make a lot of sense, but was still really creepy and really cool. It was just this area where there were these bodies in glass containers which had essentially been turned inside out and then mummified. That was a pretty effective visual for sure. Also, the remake is arguably a lot scarier than the original. And the original does have some pretty creepy moments going for it, like at the beginning when you're hearing all of these wails and laughter from the ghosts. It is kind of scary to listen to. It's definitely scarier than that other William Castle movie, 13 Ghosts, where they were just speaking to each other in this chipmunk language. And there's a scene later on in the film involving a length of rope, which I think is fairly effective. But for the most part, the film just goes for these really cheap jump scares that have not aged well. And then the walking skeleton is pretty laughable. And granted, there are some moments in the remake which, again, don't really make any sense. Like, there are some fake-out scares early on in the film involving this roller coaster. Like, the part where this fake roller coaster car goes off the rails just for the sake of scaring the car behind it. That's just not a real thing. And then something I forgot to mention about the crazy guy, played by Chris Kattan earlier, is there's this really sloppy exposition scene where he talks about the big ink blot monster which appears at the end of the film, which makes me wonder, if he knows that exists, why would he even step into this house like ever again after experiencing that? But anyway, yeah, there's the giant ink blot monster at the end, which is it's just silly. However, when the remake does utilize practical effects, holy shit, it makes a difference. Like, there's one point where this guy is found to have had his skull ripped out of his head. Damn, that was fucking scary. And then there are also just a lot of really surreal moments in the film where you don't quite know what the hell you've just seen. Like the saturation chamber is easily the best scene in the entire movie. It's got some of the most creative and effective visuals in the entire film. So, yeah, I don't care what anyone says, the remake is considerably scarier than the original House on Haunted Hill. In the end, I wouldn't say that either version is a great film, but they're not terrible either. I would, overall say that they're both enjoyably bad movies. And personally, I prefer the remake, again, just for some of the really surreal scare moments in it. Some of them don't work, but when they do work, they really work. But the original does deserve to be regarded as a classic, as many people do regard it. And that's all I've got to say for this comparison. I hope y'all have a good one.